Is called to order. This is the October 5th meeting of the Planning Board. First order of business is to review and approve the minutes from August 30th and September 7th. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I wasn't there for September 7th, so I'm not going to participate.
I wasn't there for September 7th either, so.
All right.
I don't have any. I don't have any.
You were here, right?
Yeah, but I don't have any comments.
No, it's, okay. All right, so,
I'm good.
you good? Okay, so somebody want to make a motion to accept the
Make
minutes?
a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Okay. For 8-3, was everybody here?
8-3, I was.
Okay, so,
I don't have any comments
So-
with regard to 8-3, so I guess you can do.
okay, we'll do 8-3.
Yeah.
Well, you can do 8-3 and 8-7, and I'll just note to
All right.
us.
So I'll make a motion to accept the 8-3 minutes.
Okay,
Second.
second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. And September 7th,
Make a motion for the September 7th minutes.
Second.
second. All those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, and 2 abstentions, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Next item of business is to review the sign and sign the bills. Do we have any bills?
Not for tonight.
Okay. Steve, you might be right, this might be a fast meeting. Any board member comments?
Not this evening.
No comment, Chair.
Okay. Okay, the next order of business is continued public hearing for Selco's proposed battery energy storage permit down on Worthington Ave, but Selco has sent a letter in asking if we would allow Selco to withdraw without prejudice, and they will reapply later when their plans are more complete.
For the same location? They're going to apply for the same location?
Same location, so if we can withdraw without prejudice, and they can bring it back when they're more ready than the last time.
I wasn't here, so
so-
I'm not going to participate.
The request also for withdrawal is also for waiving the fees, since they've already paid it one time, to allow the fees not have to be paid again. We already hold the review fee and application fee, so.
You got a different letter than me, but okay. That's all right. Okay, so, you have a motion to allow them to withdraw without prejudice?
Make a motion to allow for the withdrawal.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and 2 abstentions.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, the next order of business is Lake Street Estates. We were going to have a meeting with residents from that project, but we got a letter today from his attorney, but he's a resident there, right?
Yeah, president of the homeowners association,
And they're gonna meet with the developer,
correct.
and they'd like to be able to come back after that, hopefully November 2nd.
Correct. Yeah, and just as, for the board, for their information, I did go out to the site with Louise and reviewed the site and as is, and work to be completed. So, we're, have that information, and we'll be happy to provide that as needed to the board. But at this time, there's no further action needed.
I took a ride up there this afternoon, I saw what you were talking about.
Mhm.
It's a little different.
Mhm.
Okay.
So Chris, you went to the site after the last meeting.
Correct, yep, yeah, just to review the, the status of the site and, in terms of the as-built plans that were provided, and just noting, the remaining work items to be completed, so.
Great.
Okay, so the next order of business is to discuss senior housing regulations. I know that people ended up getting this late, unfortunately, very late, unfortunately.
I apologize.
But we were starting to have some discussions about whether we wanted to better define the regulations for a 55 and over community. Just so we didn't run into issues similar to what we've had in other hearings where it was there's a lot of, I don't want to say discretion, because the board has discretion, but just more uniform, like the subdivision controller. Not to stop them from coming in, but just so everybody knows going in what the criteria are.
All right.
Sure.
So, I did get a chance to talk to a few members of the board about it, and I talked with Andy Truman and got some input, and Chris and Louise and I sat down and got some input, and I sent out, I think, I don't know if everybody got, they just got Franklin, right? Looked at some other towns to get some ideas. Some of them are really, some of them are good, some of them are really off the wall. I think we just want to get the design standards right. We don't want to go crazy.
We don't have anything in place now?
Deal.
We do, but it's almost all by footnotes off the tables.
Off the use table.
Off the use table.
Yeah.
If you looked at the electronic
Antiquated.
document, well, because it adds the the inclusionary zoning, it was like 17 pages long, but there's really, out of the first 5 or 6 pages, there's only parts of it that relate because of the way the footnotes are put together. But if you want, I can just go over real quick what
Could you?
we had talked about. So this is no particular order, this is just the way I remember from my notes. So, and some of these came from discussions that we had, because I actually did watch you guys before I was on the planning board. And I hear the conversations and the concerns that came up. So some of them are from hearings that were had before, and some of them were just getting input from the staff. So one of them was, and this is just for ideas, we're not gonna deal with this tonight, but, you know, how long do we want a road to be without having to have a second outlet? And I know 600 feet have been thrown around. Andy thought 600 feet was reasonable, but I think you said you gotta be, it's
Well-
a little more than picking a number.
Yeah, so communities, from what I've seen, typically go anywhere from, usually from 250 feet all the way to 1,000 feet. Ultimately, I'm trying to find out, what's the best basis of length of a dead end without a secondary outlet is, it leaves it open. It's a little bit arbitrary picking that number, other than, there's no real basis other than other communities have it in that range. And so that's why I had talked about, that other option B. What I see is a lot of times, some of the concern is these long roads that serve, significant numbers of units. So really looking at the unit count rather than necessarily the length of road. You can do it, together, but I think sometimes the unit count is probably more effective. Obviously, financially too, for a developer that, in terms of extending a road, they're going to try to keep it short if they're limited on number of units that they could serve through that anyways. So.
Is it something that the fire department can also kind of chime in to see what they think about the length of the road, especially,
Yeah, and
number of units, obviously.
Yeah, I think having fire department, police department, and DPW to weigh in on it. Again, anything you can do to better define why you're choosing a length of road. Obviously, I think some of the concerns that would come to my mind are if for whatever reason, for catastrophe or other kind of situation that a road gets washed out or otherwise gets blocked. How many units are cut off from emergency services, or how long, length beyond that are they potentially, cut off from those emergency services until that can be restored. Again, that's where, I think that discussion of number of units comes in as well, of limiting that. There's a big difference between 2 or 3 units that have to wait, a few hours for a road to be cleared versus 30, 40 units. So that kind of unit count, I think, is an important.
We were just talking about it, like Lake Street. That, I know it's what, 900 or 1,000 feet, but it's limited density, so it doesn't feel like it's, you know, it doesn't feel like, that kind of works, is what I'm saying to you, where it is over 600 feet, there is no emergency egress, but the density just isn't there, so it's
Right.
kind of flows.
So it's one of those things that we thought we might want to look at. And
Yeah.
when do we want the second means of egress? I know that came up on Greenbrier.
Came up on
Yeah.
Greenbrier, and I struggled to find it, because it was in the, like, footnote 8 of the use table, or where we incorporate by reference our subdivision bylaws. And I think it's enough, but I think if we had it in the bylaw, it would give everybody certainty coming in, knowing exactly what waivers they needed.
Yep. So it just have its own section, so
Yeah.
there's no question of
Yeah.
jumping around. So that was one of the
I think it
things
makes sense, but
that came up.
we missed the warrant, right? For the-
Oh, yeah.
So we're talking in the spring.
Yeah, when I talked to Andy and Chris, there's like no way we could get it that quick.
There's probably a couple other things besides this we ought to talk about, so.
There's a whole bunch of stuff on the list. Whether or not we want to do them address them is another thing. There were, the density of the units on the site. And there's two ways to look at that. You got a 40-acre site, you jam it all on a few acres, and then they say that they got a lot of, they're not so dense. I don't, from what I was watching, I don't think a lot of people agreed with that. And then there was, just density in general and how close the board would like to see the units be with sprinklers or alarms. The fire department says you can go close to 10 feet. But when you look at the projects that are 10 feet, you can reach your arms out of both windows, out of both units, and you can shake hands. So a lot of other towns, it's a little bit more. It's something to consider. And then we talked about, and it came up in, I think it was in Franklin, it might have been someplace else, where if people are gonna put affordable units in, you might allow them to have a little more density to make it more affordable for them. But the towns are all over the place on what they considered more density than that, so it's something to look at.
The problem with the affordable units too is the DHCD doesn't like the over 55s. So these people end up coming in and buying us out of the affordability, which is okay.
Right.
We get more money for affordable housing, but,
That's something else we need to look at too.
yeah.
But, so it was that, and there was the setback of the units from the roadway. Make sure the driveway is long enough so a truck like mine doesn't stick out into the sidewalk of the street. It's a little over 20 feet long. It did happen in one of the units. Somebody put a deposit down, and then as the thing was getting built, drove into the unit with his pickup truck and found out it stuck out over the sidewalk. So he decided he didn't want to stay there anymore. And then there was what's the minimum driveway length. So he had minimum setback of the house in particular and a minimum driveway length.
Who governs the frequency of hydrants and stuff, the fire department?
That's part of the subdivision.
Yeah, I think it's in the subdivision, but I think there's also the fire department regulations.
Like
and
for residential, it's usually 300 feet versus 500, yeah.
Right.
So when we talk about density and other things, like, you know, I think we probably also, you know, I know we're gonna be talking about MBTA communities. This town still has a moratorium on hookups and, you know, I
On
don't
two
know what-
hookups.
on sewer hookups for residential uses. I'm not sure where that is going in light of the fact that we tied into the Upper Blackstone. You know, I know certain projects have gotten it, but it's gotta be a discussion we have.
Yeah, we have to talk to the sewer commission and town manager. I know there's capacity now, But I don't know how that fits into the thing with the needs areas and
Yeah.
all that other
Yeah,
stuff.
I know that the needs areas, you know,
Yeah.
certain projects got it based on the needs area, the
Yeah.
needs.
Are we playing nice with Worcester?
Yeah.
Is that only for certain areas along Route 20, that Edgemere area, or can it be anywhere in that town?
If I remember right from talking to Dan Magato, because that's when that whole discussion started, and then talking with Kevin, we freed up capacity, so it didn't,
Okay.
technically, it didn't make that much difference. It didn't have to be down there. Capacity was capacity.
Mm.
But I don't think anybody's actually pushed it to find out.
No,
It wasn't a Worcester thing, it would be a DEP thing, right?
right,
So, something to find out about.
yeah, because we're gonna be talking about larger projects and
Yeah, I don't know how's South Street and Green Street doing that? They're hooking in over there, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, so, I don't know.
they're
Have to
not
look.
they're not
Good
doing a
point.
package treatment plant.
And then it was like, how many vehicles per unit? So in a freestanding unit, it just didn't seem to make sense that towns were saying you could have 1.5 cars a unit. In an apartment complex or something like that, it makes sense.
You know, I know the developer of the project across from Ward Hill, what's the name of that project?
Minor farms.
Lima Farms, he wanted to put accessory garages in the rear for people who, and the
Yeah.
board didn't go along with it, so.
Yeah. There were, when I was talking with Andy, and what we had seen, some towns used, if they had a garage, it was 2 cars, but one in the garage, one in the driveway.
Sure.
And if they didn't have a garage and they had to have a 2-car driveway. However it was configured. That's something, we'd have to think about it.
Yeah.
But usually when most people move into 55 and overs, there's 2.
Correct.
It might not stay that way over the years, but there's 2. And then it was like, how many public visitor spaces do you want to have them provide? And the width of the road helps decide what that's gonna be, because if you make a 20-foot road,
Yeah.
kind of eliminate the possibility of parking on the
Street.
road.
Yeah.
So, again, it's just one of those things to think about. The other thing Andy and I talked about, we talked about it too, Chris, I think, was the minimum road width. And Andy thought 22 feet was more reasonable than like 20. I think the fire department only cares about 20 because of the trucks. But I know if you drive down one of those 55 and overs and you've got a pickup truck and a full-size car coming, you're gonna be on the grass or the sidewalk.
Right.
Right.
So,
And I think kind of how we had kind of talked about it was looking at doing a minimum roadway width of 22 feet and allowing no visitor parking. But if they were to go for a lower road width, then they would have to include visitor parking at some. We had talked a little bit about
Right.
clubhouse use to locate.
I couldn't read my note clearly. I knew there was something about that. But it's something to think about. But I think 20 feet myself, I'm no expert, I'm just going by what I see when I'm driving around. You get a 20-foot road and it snows, it makes it pretty tight. And I know it's not heavy traffic, but still, cars gotta get by each other. And then we talked about sidewalks, which was an interesting discussion. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a little bit of a push for Mass DOT to include the mixed-use trails or mixed-use paths, which, as they define it, is somewhere around, I think it's 8 to 10 feet of paving. I think there's obviously challenges in terms of that and some of the initiatives we've been doing of reducing pavement width, but I do think there's an opportunity in the way of, if you do it on one side of the road, it provides, essentially you could do, 7 to 8 potentially 7 to 8 feet, but you have fairly large sidewalks on one side of the road that can then serve as, call it a sidewalk or a mixed-use path, whichever you want. But it functions essentially as both. That if people are biking or walking, it'll accommodate that kind of complete streets feel. And then it reduces the amount of paving ultimately that's needed by doing it on one side only.
What do you do with the berm? What do you do for curbing?
Um,
Bicycles,
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be designed. I think they do. MassDOT does require the grass strip in between the curb and the pavement. Personally, I think if you're doing the 7 to 8 feet, I don't think you need it, but that's their current requirements.
You're thinking about the curb itself, where it's
Curb itself,
vertical or
yeah.
Cape Cod?
No, just curbing
Oh,
in
yeah.
general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You're
mean,
dealing with bikes,
right.
Then there was the thing about keeping the sidewalk, if they have it, on the same side of the street all the way through.
Right.
Not making, Andy brought that up too, of not having the sidewalk go so far and then people have to cross to the other side of the street.
I appreciate the idea of the complete streets and trying to accommodate it as part of the sidewalk, but then I personally hate walking on the sidewalk with people that are riding on bikes. It just becomes unwieldy, I feel. So I know that we're trying to shrink up street width, but if we really want to consider having this multi-use path, can't we really actually look at creating that dedicated path in the roadway? Like you do on any other road here, right? Rather than keeping it on the sidewalk and just having it be a sidewalk and not a multi-use path.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that could be an option too.
But we're thinking wider sidewalks anyways, a little bit wider.
Sure.
Watching people walk side by side, a lot of times they end up being one in front of the other.
Sometimes I don't want to walk side by side.
Well, I know, it's true. That's why
I don't
sometimes
always
you
want to
see-
walk side by side next to my
You see people
husband.
walk alone. So anyways, there was that, and then there was, wondering if we wanted to limit unit size. A lot of towns did. They had minimum and they had maximum.
What do you mean unit size?
The unit, the individual units, the living units.
Oh,
Like, they'd have like, some of them, they were small, like might have been 800 square feet. And then the biggest, I think, might have been 2,400, which is still pretty decent size.
Go to the one
One-
over on, off of Gold Street, those units.
Oh,
it's
Adam
3,000-4,000 square feet.
Yeah,
It's not more with the walkouts, crazy.
I don't think that makes that much difference for us. Somebody wants to build them big. It's if you're trying to push affordable units, that makes it kind of tough.
I know that they struggle finding buyers.
At that size?
No, to all these over 55s have struggled finding affordable buyers.
Really?
Yeah.
Because the
Just,
prices
there's
are
just
getting up there?
there's just no market. There's no buyers.
Well, that'd be an issue. And then we talked about open space, with, some of the open space is all swampland. Some of it is, you couldn't walk on it if you had to. And it's not, you've seen, everybody's seen it. It's not always contiguous. You get this little spot over here. It's like the developer's giving us their junk land for their open space. So some of that's legit because they can't do anything with it, but sometimes it might be worth it, because if you look at some of those cluster developments and you look at the open space, you go, how do you, as a practical matter, how do you use it? The other day when we were walking, New England Power Lines, looking for try to mark out a trail, and you have to walk it and tell them exactly where it's going and all that. So we walked it, and there was one part down by Old Mill Pond, and I was looking at the map. It's right on the pond. And I go, wow, this is great. We get to a certain point, we be on our land, and we can we can walk right along the edge of the pond. Except it was like this. There's only one way you were going on that, it was straight down into the water, so, anyways, it's something to think about. And then the last thing, that I remember to put on it was, depending on the size of the development, to require some kind of a community building. I know, the town had negotiated, I think Pulte agreed to put one in at that one that they're doing down on South Street in Green. It wasn't gonna go in. They're trying to call it a community, and then they set it up so it's not. So, we don't have the kind of land, but there were towns that actually, they're set up so you could actually have a little store, I mean, you know, a real small convenience store and other things like that, some kind of retail in them. I don't think we have that kind, we don't have that kind of room.
No,
But anyways,
and have plenty of vacant retail
so
space.
these were just some ideas. I don't know if anybody else has some, just ideas for tonight.
Now, the Franklin bylaw was just enacted.
Was it?
Yeah.
I didn't- I
It's
didn't-
fairly
I-
recent, yep.
It just seemed like it, compared to the other ones, it was, made a lot more sense.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see a town where a project had actually been built and it was viewed as a success, because, you know, we've passed, like, you know, I don't know if I mentioned, but, you know, we passed the Lakeway bylaw. I know we paid Judy Barrett, who did good work, a fortune to tweak the
It was a great
bylaw.
plan.
Yeah, but then when Grossman came in, Howard came in, he had to come in to town meeting looking for a bunch of amendments to the bylaw because it didn't work.
Yep.
So it'd be nice to see a bylaw that had been passed and a project actually been built that was viewed as a positive or a success in the town.
Yeah. I think Upton's, we could look at, yeah, there's a bunch of
Upton.
towns that have them. And some towns, like I said, some of them require 20 acres to have a 55 and up.
Why?
So anyways,
I know my friend John Burns, he is building one in Upton, and he had pickleball courts. And he went in front of the board for a modification of his site plan to eliminate them because no one wanted to buy the 6 units next to the pickleball courts.
Because of the noise.
yeah. Anyways, so, any
So,
thoughts?
let's just keep on, let's try to get an amendment on for the Springtown meeting.
Yeah.
So let's keep on working on it.
Try to
and-
collect more information.
See if
Yeah,
there's other org.
If the board's interested, what I'd like to do is do, you know, I can collect some case studies, like you mentioned, of some success stories that we can
Great.
use as an example. I know, Mo, you collected a lot of example bylaws that we can kind of look into a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Um,
What to do and not to do.
Right, exactly, yep. And then put together, you know, some kind of a workshop, a community workshop to get some input from the community as well. on-
Yeah, but first put a workshop together with us and
Yep.
maybe Andy and, get us to get kinda on the same page before we take it on the road.
Yeah, build a framework, yep.
So you would envision putting these as a putting this as a warrant article as well as probably the MBTA community on, for the Springtown meeting.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple other zoning articles that we were gonna target as well, so.
Makes sense.
But, yeah, we'll probably have 4 or 5 that we can
Yeah,
talk about.
let's start talking about them now.
Yep.
You know what in town, which I think is a nice one, it was the first one that was built,
Westbrook,
Westbrook Crossing.
that was already, right?
Yeah, but you go in there, well, a couple of my friends live down there. It's just nice. They're not on top of each other, and
Small.
they kept a lot of the trees and stuff in it when they built it.
The problem with this is the floodplain, right? Or did they amend that?
I think it's on the edge of a floodplain.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a nice project,
But,
lays out
yeah,
nice.
they laid it out
Yeah.
nice, but, so, I mean, we got an example of a nice one right here, but, anyways. All right, so we'll go with that.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, MBTA communities. You got a little slideshow for us?
I do have a little slideshow. I don't know if members watched the select board meeting. It's
No.
the same presentation, but I'll run through it fairly quickly. And then I'm kind of open it up to discussion. Let me just make sure I can share. Presenter view.
Doesn't want to work?
I think I can do it.
There you go.
How am I doing? All right. I think we're there. Yeah, so thank you. So I just wanted to talk about the MBTA zoning, some of the updates that we've had, as well as kind of some of the progress that we've made and kind of next steps of where we're looking to pursue and look into for the development of zoning compliance. So just as a brief overview, reminder of what MBTA communities legislation is. It was enacted in January 14th of 2021 as part of the Economic Development Bond Bill. It creates the new Section 3A, MGL, Chapter 40A of the Zoning Act. What it mandates is that by December 31 of 2024, Shrewsbury must adopt zoning that has a number of minimum requirements. I'm not going to go through each of those, but it really kind of specifies what, zoning needs to be adopted. Important aspect is that it is a state mandate, and if it's not adopted by the town, we become ineligible for a number of grant opportunities. Currently, there's 13 discretionary grants identified that we would be locked out of, and it equates to, currently that we are currently utilizing about $5 million of related grants that would no longer be eligible. So it is a significant funding source that would be taken away. Going a little bit deeper, so it does identify community housing capacity requirements, which is based upon the 2020 housing unit from the census. For Shrewsbury, this is based off of that number and requires a zone to be created that can reasonably accommodate construction of 1,497 units. It's important to note that this does not consider existing units on the property. So, it assumes bare land, so there's some benefit, I think, of pursuing, looking at existing higher density locations that either may be conducive to redevelopment or otherwise, if there's not the existing density, but other areas that could be conducive to that development, rather than looking at, bare land. But that doesn't preclude that we could take that strategy, if the
And it
town-
doesn't mean we have to build them, we have to have the capacity to build.
Correct, and so, so there's no mandate to provide the infrastructure. That would be done as part of the normal land use process, depending upon how the project is, brought to the town. But it would be on the developer to come to the town and figure out some of that capacity and how they would accommodate any of the infrastructure for the town.
What about projects that are in the pipeline? Like, what is the date? You can't count existing units.
Right.
I hear you on that. What about new units that are going to be coming online? They haven't pulled permits for it yet, but.
Yeah, and so that's another opportunity, units that are in the pipeline that are either otherwise approved or going through the process. I think it'd be, important to evaluate, if we're pursuing that strategy, what is the differences in the zoning that we're passing versus the current proposal, and is that is that an amenable change that it allows the developer to shift to? But that is another, you know, if we have, for example, a 40B that's coming in that we want to look at MBTA zoning, you know, we could also use that. And we can also pick and choose these strategies a little bit for finding a location. So the locational requirements is we do need to find a total of 50 acres to dedicate to this zone. It doesn't have to be one contiguous zone. It can be, say, 25 acres here and a couple 10 acres elsewhere. So that's, you know, we can kind of workshop that when we kind of finalize a strategy for developing the zoning.
I, just seeing the brouhaha that we just went through with Beal, my suggestion is just say, let's just pick the Route 20 overlay and say, that's where it's going. Because I think you may have a hard time getting it through town meeting otherwise.
Okay.
Just my thought.
Yep. So then,
Chris, I have a question.
Yeah.
The 50 acres you mentioned, is that for Shrewsbury size, or does the acreage depend on the overall town land area, or a small town, big town? Any town has to allocate that only 50 acres?
yeah, the 50 acres, it doesn't matter the size of the community. That's, each community that was identified is either an MBTA or an adjacent, does have to do the 50 acres. If they're an adjacent community, they can locate those 50 acres anywhere within the town, which we are. If they're an MBTA community, which means they have a station within their town boundaries, they do need to locate, I believe it was 25 acres at minimum, within a half-mile radius of their station. So we have a little bit more flexibility being an adjacent community. So just in terms of density, obviously that's, I think, going to be a key component of this discussion with the community and the development of this zoning. And I think, you know, regardless of opinions of these styles of developments, you know, there is a need that's been demonstrated through a number of our plans, whether it's the housing production plan, the master plan. And I think specifically there's a need for this middle housing, where we show, you know, there's the low density single detached house, and looking at it more as a variety of housing where it's not just, you know, a single family home or a high rise apartment. There's this middle density and middle housing that I think we can look at for providing that you know, diversity of housing stock. And that actually exists already in town, that diversity of housing stock through other, you know, methods and land use throughout time. We do see that is existing. And so again, I think looking at this zoning and seeing if there's an opportunity to use it as a way to streamline or enhance some of the existing density that we already have, I think is an opportunity that we might want to look at. But again, providing that diversity of housing stock is important. The way that the zoning looks, the MBTA zoning looks at density is specifically dwelling units per acre. And I think it's important to point out, you know, I have a couple of local examples there, but, you know, 15 units per acre is really, it can change in what the feel is depending upon site specifics, whether it's, you know, design or, you know, other kind of density, you know, size of the unit and style of development. And so although we have this graphic on there of, you know, this is 1 unit per acre, this is 6 units per acre, it's rarely that formulaic. And so I think that's why having design guidelines and design criteria for this zoning is going to be a key component to developing projects that we really do want to see, and a key component of guiding that development when we talk about density, beyond just dwelling units per acre to satisfy the requirements. So then next steps, what I kind of propose is our strategy to tackling this. and I'll step through each of these. I split into strategies to explore and recommended zoning considerations. First and foremost, in the strategies to explore, I think there's an opportunity to review the Chapter 40R zoning, which is the smart growth zoning, and I'll get into that. Actually, I'll just go on and go through these one by one. So 40R smart growth zoning looks at growth different from place to place. It's an overall approach development that encourages a mix of building types and uses, and diverse housing and transportation options. It's really looking at, similar to cluster development of bringing some housing density in order to provide additional open space opportunities and additional opportunities in that land use fabric. So it does encourage communities to create the dense residential or mixed use development, and this is specifically the Massachusetts smart growth. It does encourage a high percentage of affordable housing units located near transit stations. That language may sound very familiar from the MBTA zoning, so it's definitely related, and they do note in the MBTA zoning that 40R is mentioned in it, and it is an eligible zoning type. Notable as well as, projects that are developed under Chapter 40R similarly are as of right or through a limited plan review akin to site plan review, which I think is something that we would want to include. But it does provide a number of financial incentives that regular zoning does not. And it's based off of kind of passage of the zoning as well as capacity of number of units to be built. And then additionally, when units are built, there's additional financial incentive to the community to help offset impacts and costs of that development.
And what would those financial incentives be?
So it ranges from community to community, and I'll give a couple examples in the next couple slides. But primarily, it's from passage of the zoning. They have a formula that allocates how much. And I think it's based off of the unit capacity, a formula of how much the town acquires just for passing the zoning successfully. Then when the development, if a development is finally created, I believe it's $3,000 per unit that gets matched to the community. So can provide a significant funding source. There's also additional financial incentives that are outlined that I'm not as familiar with, but related to school children. So as school children move into these developments, there's additional financial incentives that go directly to that can be allocated directly to the school, which I don't think you'll find anywhere else. So this just shows a map of kind of the 40R approved districts and eligible districts in Massachusetts from the mass.gov website. As you can see, it's not widely adopted, but I think it is something that's growing, and I think there is an opportunity to at least evaluate and see if this is something that we want to pursue. Just giving some brief smart growth profiles. These are again, right from the mass.gov website on 40R. I encourage you to go through and look at those. There's a wealth of knowledge and information on these projects that I'm not going to cover tonight, but it is there on the mass.gov website. But they have three examples that they show. So one is Haverhill, again, going to that, so that was a 53-acre mixed-use district that did 362 units built. And provides for over 500 units that were not previously allowed by right. Again, going to those financial incentives for passage of the zoning, they received $1.6 million, closer to $1.7 million in funding, and an additional $1.7 in state funds for their intermodal parking facility. That zoning in Haverhill was adopted in 2007, so 40R has been around for quite some time. And they've had two projects since, Hamel Lofts in December of 2009, and Hayes at Railroad Square in September of 2010. Moving on, Reading is another. This was located in their MBTA station as well. So it's a 26-acre mixed-use district. 53 units were built, including 11 affordable units. And their zoning provides for a minimum of 256 units not previously allowed. They received $509,000 to their general fund. That zoning was adopted in 2009, and they've had one project since in the summer of 2012. And then this last example, which I think is a little bit more conducive to that strategy that I was talking about of redevelopment, is Northampton, that redeveloped their old state hospital. It was a 16-acre mixed-use district. 63 units were built, including 32 affordable units, so they drove a lot of affordability into that project. Smart growth zoning provided for a minimum of 156 housing units that weren't previously allowed. They received $320,000 to the general fund. That was adopted in 2007, and the project was built in 2008. So then moving on, the other strategy that I'd like to pursue is developing an economic feasibility analysis. What this would allow is the flexibility, if we so choose in our zoning, to allow a greater percentage of affordable units, or to require a greater percentage of affordable units, and require deeper affordability restrictions than under the zoning without this economic feasibility analysis. Currently, it's capped at 10%, 10% of affordable. You can't go beyond that in requirements, and the 80% AMI threshold, area median income. What we found in our studies already to date is, so I think it's there, is that we do need to drive deeper affordability, and that, we do currently require 10%, but having that flexibility to drive additional affordability into projects allows us to put more onto the subsidized housing inventory, and has the benefits there of providing additional protections and guiding future development. And again, I kind of included down there the selected monthly owner costs. Those are some of the metrics that I usually look to from the census, looking at housing cost burden, and we do see that significant portions of our community are housing cost burden, which means that more than 30% of their income goes towards just base housing costs. So this is a breakdown of, as mentioning in addition to the benefits of providing affordable housing within the community and the need for that, there's also the regulatory benefits in terms of guiding future development by achieving safe harbor status. So we did provide a memo to the select board back in 2022 that detailed some of those routes to safe harbor. I'm not going to go through that in detail tonight, but that is there. Looking at the recommended zoning considerations, I think it's important to look at proximity to existing and proposed high-density housing, as we mentioned, proximity to multimodal and traffic opportunities, and looking at, do we want to look at a single site and find 50 acres that is, all in one area, or do a multi-site approach and kind of spread out some of those denser projects throughout the community. I think we also want to look at the impacts to commercial and industrial zones. It doesn't preclude that, but I think the housing does have to be allowed by right, and so we just want to make sure that when we place that 50 acres, we're not putting it in a place that has a strong commercial base. So
If you want to pack the room, say we're thinking about the foundation project.
Yeah, right.
Is there any potential for other considerations, looking at what adjacent communities are doing in terms of, like, if there's I guess, is there an opportunity to work with, say, the town of Grafton so that, you know, these areas kind of overlap? And I don't know if this is possible, if they do tend to overlap. Can Grafton get some of the benefit of Shrewsbury having it, and Shrewsbury have the benefit of, like, can you share, is, I guess, the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity to explore. Obviously, it would depend upon, you know, their willingness to kind of, you know, go into that and looking at where they're trying to place it. I think there's a little bit of everyone's kind of watching everyone else of like what they're doing with MBTA and how they're doing it. I know we're watching other communities pretty closely. But certainly we could reach out and see if there's an opportunity to kind of co-locate on the borders, whether that's an option or not. I do know that, you know, Grafton already had their 40R station, or 40R development that's right near to their station. So I'd have to look back at where they're pursuing it. You know, I haven't been close to that in some time. I know they were looking at that area as their MBTA zone, but I don't know where that discussion's gone since. So, but yeah.
So Grafton in this particular MBTA zoning scenario would be the MBTA community itself versus we are neighboring community, right? Neighboring town. So the requirements for whether it be acreage or the density, all those, I think I would assume would be a lot more stringent for Grafton versus Shrewsbury, right?
Yeah, so they do have to locate. So they do have to locate. Or no, sorry, they're an adjacent community, even though they have a station in there.
Really?
Yes.
How do they
How
do
come?
that?
How
And I
come?
don't remember there was. It's based on the amount of land that is institutional land, that essentially of Job Corps that's there, and so the developable land that's within a half mile of their station is not conducive to that development, and so they're allowed the adjacent status.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
so so a little bit of a caveat there. For
Remember
them.
that.
So they may still locate it, and they have an existing 40R zone, and they may still locate it there. That was one of the strategies that they were looking at, but yeah. So
Yeah.
Interesting.
so this is kind of the anticipated timeline for development of zoning. So we're looking at fall and winter of 2023, doing some public outreach and listening sessions, really kind of engaging the community and seeing what their kind of input into this process is, what they'd like to see out of the zoning, and really kind of connecting them into the discussion. We're targeting for March of 2024 to have draft zoning to the planning board and select board, which is kind of normal for our adoption of zoning, targeting the May 2024 annual town meeting for adoption. What that'll do is that'll allow us, a fall town meeting if it's needed in order to do some final adjustments. It's one of those situations where we have to submit zoning, and then after it's passed, we'll be told if it's compliant or not. And so it's a little bit, making sure that we have a little bit of a fallback. If it's, for whatever reason, found not to be compliant, we can then amend it and still meet that December 2024 deadline.
And given we haven't adopted a 40R bylaw and we haven't adopted MBTA,
Right.
but knowing that we're probably gonna have to adopt the MBTA. I looked at it, and if I were a developer, I think that even if both bylaws were available, I would probably go with the MBTA.
Mhm.
Gives the town a lot less discretion.
Right. Yeah, I think, and so 40R, again, I think it goes back to that economic feasibility in terms of getting discretion, and even just flexibility in passing regulations that, that we may want to have, given kind of the community objectives. 40R, you can actually go all the way up to 25% of units required as affordable. If we did the economic feasibility analysis, we're actually only able to go up to 20%. That's still, a sizable amount. You're doubling the percentage that you can do under base conditions. But again, that and then being able to pursue deeper affordability, I think, really allows us the flexibility to drive some of those things that have been identified as objectives for the community.
Is
in
the
a more meaningful way.
DHCD gonna count all the units in the project or just the affordable ones?
So if we do typically, if it's the way they get counted to the SHI, is if they're home ownership or condo units, you only get what you build. Under rental, there is an incentive, and I believe it was 20% that then the entire project can get included, including the market rate on the SHI. And so that is a benefit in terms of driving affordability, and really getting to that 10% is you're able to
Right.
to really put some numbers into the SHI that way.
So, but if they're rental units, will all the units in a MBTA communities project count for the affordable housing stock?
I'd have to double check. I believe it was 20%. It may be 25% are included.
Okay.
But if we're able to do
Whatever the 40B
what that,
is.
yeah, right, what that
okay.
provision is, if we're able to, then we would be able to count all towards the market rate, whether it's 40R or MBTA. Yep.
Good. We can count them all towards the affordable,
Yeah.
the market rate.
Yeah, so
count.
the SHI doesn't determine how
Right.
which zoning develops the project. It just looks at having a project developed, and then you get the credit for that.
More bang for the buck.
Okay. Seems like a pretty aggressive schedule to get that thing for May.
Yep.
You're gonna have more than one hearing on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, public input, just,
Yeah, and we'll have a number of community sessions throughout the fall and winter, and definitely just targeting that spring.
You may have
And then,
to meet twice or something in April.
yeah, and I think depending upon, certainly how that goes, realistically, I anticipate we'll have some more draft language for the board to consider. We may be able to start even in January, February to kind of start that discussion with some draft regulations. And obviously have the community engaged in that process too, but we'll be doing some outside of this process as well, just kind of meeting more informally with the community and getting their input, so.
Question. Chris, our neighboring communities like Westboro and Southboro, they are MBTA communities. Are they pretty much in the same stage in the process as we are? Or are they way ahead, or any idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I know Grafton was already pursuing, they're doing the economic feasibility analysis. So I was gonna try and see what kind of bids came back for them so I could kind of better price what we would be looking at. That's gonna be a tough one because I think it's new. And so there's not really a basis of really knowing how much those are gonna cost from that standpoint. But, yeah, I know Westboro and Grafton are developing that zoning. I think they're probably targeting similar timelines in terms of adoption.
That feasibility analysis, is that anything that you can use CMRPC dollars for, or is that?
So we've used most of our LTA hours. CMRPC may be able to be selected as a consultant. We'll have to do the regular procurement with them, but certainly they would
Not
be
the
they would be mentioned in the we would reach out to them when we did the RFP for that study. One of the and I think there's also a lot of overlap with this. I'll be kind of talking with the Affordable Housing Trust next week. And that's one of the things that I'll be asking for them to fund that study, as well as we are due for our housing production plan update. the housing production plan requires a housing needs analysis, which I think is very close to what this economic feasibility analysis is. So I think there's going to be a lot of overlap there. Speaking of SNEPA, there was I was thinking there's a good opportunity to share a consultant between those two projects potentially. But even in SNEPA, there's a good point of having two different consultants work on that similar work and having them kind of fact check each other. So, we'll kind of consider that when we get to that
It'd
stage.
be a good line of business for the WBDC to get in. Thinking about it.
Potentially.
There you go.
Just to add a note, the CMRPC has a lot of data on the transportation part of it, and I think even if we have exhausted the LPA hours, I think it's a good idea to get their expertise on this as a consultant. They have tons of data on the whole transportation needs for the region,
Right.
and they are probably helping a lot of these communities already. So
Yeah.
it will be good for the town.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Our next order of business is to review the proposed edits to the rules and regulations for site plan approvals and special permits.
Yeah, so this is, you would have found in the documents I sent over, a red line version of our rules and regulations. This is primarily in relation to our office has transitioned into fully paperless. We're using the online permitting system. What these amendments are looking at is really just kind of memorializing that within the regulations, pointing to the online portal system. The process still remains very much the same, but it is now paperless, and so it just kind of solidifies that within the rules and regulations, kind of pointing to that modernized system that we're using to process these. So we've seen a lot of success with the projects that are kind of going through that online permitting. We're really proud of kind of the process that has been. So still tweaking it here and there, but really think it's been a beneficial adoption. So.
Anybody? Do you have anything you want to go through first, or?
I mean, that was primarily it. I mean, I'm happy to go through it, or if I know it was sent pretty late. So if the board wants to take their time and kind of read through it and digest it,
Get a chance to read
Yep,
it.
there's only a couple of paragraphs though, right?
yeah. I mean, it's fairly
And we don't need to do it tonight, but I mean, there's only a couple of paragraphs.
right. Yeah, it's just the procedure section.
Can I just note one thing? On the filing procedures, section 5, it says, with the change, it's going to say if an application is found to be incomplete, staff may advise the applicant of the omitted information. So I would suggest, based on a number of conversations, not so much about this part of the permitting, but permitting in general, that should say shall.
Okay.
Because there were a lot of applicants, I mean, a lot, but there's been numerous applicants who have complained that the application sitting where whoever's office happens to be, have responsibility with the application, and they're waiting and waiting, and then they call up and they find out that there was something that was missing, but they were never told.
Okay.
So the impression I get is that the offices are waiting for people to call and say, what's the status of it? And maybe they're busy, I don't know. And I don't know how true every single one of them is, but I've heard it. And it would just seem if we were going through an application and we saw something that was deficient, wouldn't we want to tell them so we can clear that thing out of the system?
Yeah, and I think that's our typical process.
Yeah,
So I'd be fine with that.
It wasn't,
the
it
language.
wasn't your department that I'm talking about, so just to be clear about that. But it did happen, numerous times I've been told it over the past couple of years, that they found out the application was sitting because it needed more information and nobody got back to them and told them.
Okay.
So I guess they don't want to be too pushy trying to get the permit. They want to aggravate anybody, and then they wait, and then they find out that it's been sitting there for 2 or 3 weeks, literally, and found out that there was something missing.
Okay.
So I think shall would,
Okay.
I just don't want to get in a situation where we're doing all their work for them.
no, we're just telling them it's missing.
Right. Hey, I looked at this and you're missing this, this, and this.
Well, we do it anyways,
Right.
right? We're going through it to make sure it's complete, right?
Yeah, I mean, it should be a fairly straightforward process. One of the benefits of what I think that with the online permitting system is that it really does clearly show like what are required documents and then even recommended documents like supplemental information. The required documents, it won't let them move forward without submitting those. It doesn't mean that, you know, you don't get junk
Right.
that's submitted
Right.
in its place.
That's where
Um,
the issue is.
Right.
No,
But I think that's an internal.
I think to
Process
Steve's
that
point, it isn't to do the work for him.
Right.
It's if there's something missing, because sometimes there'll be a form, and there's something missing on the form. The form was submitted, and they inadvertently left something off.
Right.
And then we're waiting for that information. They don't realize they didn't do it right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I agree, we shouldn't be doing their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that
I know in the past, there've been instances where
Yeah,
engineering just kind of thrown up their hands and
Yeah.
done the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think where it says, you know, notes the deficiency, that would be, you know, we would just say that this is,
right.
you know, please see this section, this is not in accordance with it, and,
Yeah, I don't have a full set of documents, I can't review the plans
right.
or the application.
I think there are two aspects to that. One is administratively whether something that they submitted as a checkbox items, you know, and then on the technical adequacy of the information that they submitted, whether that meets our requirements. At any stage, is there a correspondence going out of the planning department to the applicant saying your application is complete, so that they can kind of rest assured that that it's okay and they don't have to worry about us calling them back later and telling them we are waiting for information, you know?
Right,
And that,
yeah,
again, I actually think that's one of the real strengths of this online permitting system is it's tied right into email, and so, if the applicant puts a comment in, into the permit system, it kicks an email right, you know, directly to my inbox or whoever's overseeing that permit. And vice versa, when I put a comment in, it's supposed to go directly to them, and they can add in, you know, notifying parties like guests on their permit, so it can go out to their contractors and subs, and so the communication aspect of it, I think there is a little bit of a learning curve of getting it kind of dialed into how you want it, but I've seen a lot of, you know, most developers or most contractors seem to have picked that up pretty well.
like, it wasn't planning.
Yep.
I'm not gonna tell you who it was, but it wasn't planning. Okay, so this is good. Do you want to bring this back next week, or,
Yeah.
Yeah, if we can hold it on the agenda and bring it back.
yeah, it doesn't look like very much.
One last question, Chris, like with this online approach, how are they able to submit these site plans, huge plans, you know? Are they submitting that electronically also? And if yes, then is your review process becoming more difficult for you? I mean, it's one thing to spread those big sheets on a desk and review versus on a screen, you know, or not that we can help it. I mean, with this whole idea of paperless, we have to go that route, you know.
Yep.
Even if it's going to be a lot more difficult to review on screen, I think we are going that route anyway. But I was just wondering how it is working out for you folks, you know?
Yeah, so it's submitted. We do require PDFs. We've gotten some weird file types, but we do require PDF. But what it does is it actually creates a really good record where they can submit a new version of a plan. All of them are accessible. So as they make revisions to a plan, we see here's the original version and here's how it changed, and we can open any of those. And right at the top is here's the latest version, so it's easy to get to. I think it's made it very usable rather than opening a plan and trying to figure out, oh, where was that other plan that I had that, from, weeks ago, to see if those changes were made. It creates a little bit more of an organized environment too, that it's all right there. And then as they go through steps, it will open approval steps. So, for example, when they've, passed some of planning, it might open up, additional comments from other departments, and they, it allows the departments to comment on it, as they have the time. So it's kind of at their discretion a little bit, rather than, just one meeting, kind of set up to do that. We do still hold our regular in-person meetings with department heads on these, but, for that reason of making sure everyone's commenting on time, but it does provide that if people can't attend that meeting, they can go right into the system. And
I know, I've used the building permit one, and being able to go on and see the status, it is helpful.
Mhm.
And you can go on and see other projects too.
Yep.
So there's a lot of transparency in that and see what's going on. Okay. Anything else? No? Okay. So tell us about this tree guideline program.
Yeah, so really excited about this one as well. So these are tree guidelines, and similarly, I know that there's a lot in there, and it was submitted pretty late. So if we want to kind of hold on to it and digest it, I'm happy to. But primarily this was developed through the Conservation Office in collaboration with engineering and our office, primarily conservation though. So what it is it's guidelines. It really goes over kind of species that, tree species that we want to see, as well as some of the other kind of details of guidelines of what we want to see in landscaping. Some of the best practices. Ultimately, they're guidelines. They're non-binding, and it's simply a reference tool for be it the board or departments. In the future, I think there's an opportunity if we really feel like it to then as we see projects, if there's deficient landscaping in an initial plan, we can point to these documents and say, please go to these guidelines, and it provides that kind of documented backdrop of this is what we've evaluated. So
When we get a landscape plan, they look at it, we never ask what they're gonna plant.
right, and I think this would be something that if the board feels that it's appropriate, we could then require the landscape plans to be in conformance with the tree guidelines, or not. But or we could do it on a per project basis, but it allows us that flexibility, and it's better than rather I've been in meetings not with this community but where they were picking plant types that they wanted to see planted, and hard to have those hold up in court.
Yeah.
But if you have guidelines, that's much more cohesive to say that that's what the town looks to. So.
Yep.
It was a
Makes
big
sense.
document, but I thought it was pretty good. It was pretty complete. I didn't get to go through the whole thing, but the relevant part of it, the guideline part of it, it's not that long. Most of that is all the different species
Yeah.
of plants.
Mhm.
That, it doesn't look like the guidelines are very onerous. They're pretty easy to follow, so.
But the preferred ones are the most expensive ones.
But,
You noticed that.
Generally how it goes.
You get some squawking.
Yeah. We got to tie in with the nurseries.
Yeah, I think the nurseries know the preferred
But no,
ones, so
it
they
is
price
pretty good.
so.
I thought it was pretty good.
It was very educational for me, and now I can look at my backyard trees and say, go to this and, oh, this is this tree, So color pictures and
Now you can go down to Russell's nursery and you can go in there and tell them what you should be getting instead of them telling you.
but very helpful information.
But it looks good. All right, so we'll follow up on that later. And then the last thing we have is to, just to review that post-development traffic monitoring.
I'm gonna recuse
monitoring.
myself from, I
Okay.
won't leave the, I suppose I'll sit over here, because my office did the permitting.
It's gonna be pretty quick.
Yeah.
So, as part of the permit process, the developers were required to review some conditions in the site plan, in the approval. And one of them was to come back in about 6 months and check the traffic and see if it was working the way they thought it was gonna work. And we did ask them to do that, and they did. And they found a few, the engineers found a few changes that they thought should be made, which, at least for Lake Street, kind of tied into complaints that we were getting. So I think it was good that it wasn't people's imagination. So VHB recommended some changes to the Lake Street movement, and then some to the Route 20 movement at different times. And I thought I saw something, and then I couldn't find it, and I sent an email to Andy, and he said that there has been discussion with MassDOT about changing that.
Yep, there was an email that I was actually just trying to look up real quick. But yeah, so in discussion, after this post-occupancy, when it gave the recommendations, the project proponent did reach out to MassDOT. Those discussions have happened, and MassDOT has agreed to adjust the lighting of that Lake Street. The email specifies what they agreed to, and I'm not going to be able to find
Right.
it tonight, but they are, it's in line with the recommendations of the post-occupancy study. In terms of timing of that, we don't have a definitive timeline of when MassDOT will make those changes, but it is going to happen in the relatively near future. They're aware of it, and it's been agreed to, so.
Is this a one-shot deal where they do the traffic analysis this one time and hopefully address all the kinks and then it's fine? Or is there going to be another potential analysis that they say 6 months after these changes are done?
Yeah, so
Is it an ongoing thing? And
Yeah.
it is ongoing.
Okay.
Couple of years,
I have
I
to go
think.
back to the conditions, but yeah, I think after several years after, then there's another one to again evaluate the project and the changes that have been made. So there's a number of post occupancy studies that will be conducted. So this is one of a number of them.
Just have to remember to ask
Actually
them,
do that.
remind
Yeah,
them that
right.
it's time to do it. But they did it, it was no problem, we reminded them they did it. That review was pretty interesting, though. There was, some of the traffic didn't materialize as, at the higher levels that they thought gonna happen. And really, it looks like, I think it's gonna make a big difference, but the changes that they made look like they're relatively minor tweaks for complicated signals, so.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Lisa?
I was very impressed with the way we crafted the condition when we approved Edgemere, and I think this is a very good example for future major traffic-related projects to include this kind of post-development analysis. And to answer your question, Julie, they have a 6-month study, 12-month, 24-month, and 40.
Okay.
So, like over the
That's a
next
good
3-4
period of
years,
time, absolutely.
and by then, like again, if there are some discrepancies because of the seasonal changes or post-COVID, that over a longer period of time, it should work out okay. Overall, traffic was below what they expected, but this Lake Street one is the one that kind of a lot more traffic showed up on Lake Street heading into the Edgemere. And that's where they are suggesting some changes in the timing of the lights, I think.
Yeah, did you just see why they think that happened? Because they're not, people aren't using that second entrance very much.
Mhm.
And so the traffic went to the Lake Street instead. But, you know, overall, I think it's worked pretty good.
Yeah, I think it worked good.
So anyways, well, that's good. Okay, so do we have anything else? We have any old business?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Do we have any correspondence? I didn't see any.
None for tonight.
Okay, so then our next order of business is to accept the motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second? Okay, we have motion is second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. We are adjourned. Good evening.